So we have this entirely Zoom, FaceTime, Instagram relationship. Who knows? Maybe we would like hate each other in real life. I don't think so. But like we have never met. It's going to be really weird when we do, I think.
Welcome to the Asian Sewist Collective podcast. The Asian Sewist Collective is a group of Asian people from around the world brought together by our shared appreciation for fiber and textile arts, and our desire to see more Asian representation in the sewing community. In this podcast, we explore the intersection of our identities and our shared sewing practice as we create a space for Asian sewists and our allies. I'm your co-host, Ada Chen, and I'm recording from Denver, Colorado. Denver is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. I'm a Taiwanese-American marketer turned entrepreneur, and these days you'll find me running my own all-natural skincare business called Chuan Skincare, that's CHUAN, and sharing my marketing tips on my blog, The Cultivate Method. Most importantly for this podcast, you can find my sewing at i.hope.sew, S-E-W, on Instagram.
And I'm your co-host, Nicole. I'm based outside of Chicago, the original homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, and the Odawa people. I'm a Filipinx-American woman and a lawyer by day and a sewing enthusiast the rest of the time. You can find me on Instagram at Nicole Angeline Sews.
Before we dive into this week's episode, Nicole, can you tell us about your current sewing project?
Yes, I can. I'm still, working on cleaning out my sewing space. And I found some really cute, inexpensive cottons that I bought last year when I was planning on making masks. And since I'm over that now, I figured I could use them for wearable toiles. I'm over making masks. Masks are still necessary in certain settings. We are still in a pandemic, but I'm just over making masks. And I have been for a while. And let me ask you this, Ada. Are you into statement collars?
I really just... it's extra fabric around my neck and they're kind of finicky to sew, so if I can get away with not. But, like on the last episode, I was telling you about how I was making polos because I needed collared shirts for golfing, so I guess I can't get away with zero collars in my life.
I mean, the polo shirt is like the opposite of a statement collar. It's like not making a statement at all. But so I ask, right? Because statement collars are kind of like a thing right now, tied to the cottagecore aesthetic. It's not really my jam, but I did end up picking up a couple of Nina Lee patterns because, of course, I have been influenced by the Instagram. You all know how I can be influenced. This isn't frivolous though. So there are 3 amazing Black sewists that are based out of Chicago who are besties that I follow. So it's at the Sewing Jurist, a fellow lawyer, yay, at LaDonna Coakley, and at Me and My Stitch. So the 3 of them are friends. I follow them on Instagram, and they all 3 made the Nina Lee Bloomsbury blouse without sleeves as a project. And it does have a statement like fringe yoke collar thing and like a high neck, but they made it without sleeves and they looked so good. I had to try it. So I have maybe I should send you the link, Ada, or you can find, we'll put a link in the show notes to the inspo post. But long story short, I'm going to be working on a sleeveless Nina Lee Bloomsbury blouse because I felt like the sleeves would just be way too overpowering on me, in a white cotton that's been kind of tie-dyed with tan and glitter. So it's a cheapy cotton, but it'd be a good twirl. So maybe by the time this airs, it'll be on my grid. What about you, Ada? What are you working on?
Love the tan, love the glitter. Can't wait to see this. Personally, not for me, but I love to cheer you on. I am probably doing the opposite of that. I'm focusing on some comfy, cool clothes because we've been in a heat wave here. So it's been about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so like high 30s, mid to high 30s in Celsius. And it's too hot to wear clothes. So, but you have to. So I'm tracing some, you have to. I am tracing some crop tank tops from knit scraps. So I've got a bunch of like half yard knit scraps that are really cute and stretchy and comfy, but a half yard you can't do much with besides make maybe a crop top. So I've been tracing some of my ready to wear athletic wear into racerback tank tops, and that's been fun. It's also so much harder than I thought it would be. Like, props to everybody who is self-drafting or tracing their own garments, because I've been watching YouTube videos on it and they make it look so much easier and so much faster than it has turned out to be for me.
That's how they get you.
Now, our original plan for this episode was to chat about the history of the Qipao or Cheongsam for the final episode of the season, but we've pushed that back because we felt a conversation about size inclusivity was more important to have right now. We will definitely talk about the Qipao next season, but for those of you who spend time in the maker community and on social media, you might have noticed a lot of discussion on size inclusivity lately, especially a few months ago during Me Made May.
You might have seen hashtags like hashtag so limited sizing, SEW, hashtag not drafted for me, and people posting the minimum and maximum size measurements of the patterns they use in order to better inform those of us browsing and considering using the pattern. It's also a way to gently nudge or perhaps push pattern makers to offer a better, wider size range. Today, we want to share a conversation we had with Leila Kelleher about size inclusivity. Leila's written a lot on this subject. She's at Leela_sews online and half of Mona and Broad, a pattern making company which creates beautiful designs for large bodies.
Before we share our conversation with Leila, I did want to add that Leila talks about her experience being a transracial adoptee, and we'd like to take this opportunity to share that Leila is open to connecting with other adoptees. However, if you're not an adoptee and you don't know Leila personally, please refrain from asking her invasive questions about her personal life or her background. It's quite frankly none of your business to be poking around an internet stranger's life, and sliding into her DMs with these types of questions can be quite rude and honestly a little weird when you don't know someone. So, with that PSA out of the way, let's share our interview with Leila.
Welcome, Leila. For listeners who may not be familiar with you, can you please introduce yourself?
Thanks for having me on. My name's Leila, and I am one half of Mona and Broad. We are an independent pattern company.
And how would you say your identity as an Asian woman intersects with your sewing?
Well, to be honest, I don't actually know that my Asian identity does intersect much with my sewing. Most people don't know this, but I'm transracially adopted, which means that I was adopted as a baby from Korea into a white family. So most of my cultural identity is actually white cultural identity. And so I didn't grow up surrounded by cultural sewing, certainly not Asian cultural sewing or anything like that.
And thanks for sharing that with us. And you mentioned most people don't know it, and we appreciate you bringing that piece of you to the podcast. You wrote a blog post in 2020 entitled Learning to be Fat, in which you said, quote, "Over the years, I've spent a lot of time and energy trying to disguise my fatness from the rest of the world. Of course, now I have realized that not only is it pointless, I am fat, it is a fact and everyone can tell, I have also come to the point where I just don't care who knows." And you shared about your internalized fat phobia, finding that what you were missing was representation of fat bodies. Now, listeners, we highly encourage you to take a read of this post, and we'll link the post to the show notes. And Leila, we wanted to ask you, can you give us some thoughts about how your experience living as an Asian person may have colored the way that you see yourself as a fat person?
Yeah, for sure. So I didn't actually understand any kind of body diversity in Asian people at all, apart from the kind of stereotypes that I think that a lot of white people have, because I grew up in a very white-centric environment. So my impression growing up was that, Asian people were typically very thin. And now I will say here that I did not grow up as fat, and so that is a privilege that I have in terms of not receiving like a lot of fat phobic comments and that kind of thing as a child. I didn't gain weight until I was in my teenage years. So it is a different experience to some people who have experienced growing up their entire life as fat. And also, I want to just say here that the word fat, I'm using that as a neutral descriptor of body size, just as I would say that my hair's black, or, my eyes are brown, that kind of thing, or that I'm Asian. It's just a fact. So it's an identity that some people who live in larger bodies have reclaimed from the pejorative, and some people have not. So it's really important that if you are going to use it as a neutral descriptor of somebody, you need to kind of know that they're comfortable with that. Anyway, back to the back to the question. Most Asian people were thin, and I was not. I already felt a little bit disconnected from my Asian identity, like very disconnected from my Asian identity. And I think that my body size, that even exacerbated it, because I didn't even physically resemble what I perceived to be an Asian body.
Interesting. So it's almost like there was no example for you to kind of reconcile those two parts of your identity.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, if you believe that almost all Asian people are thin and petite, and you don't conform to that, then it's hard to see where you fit in. And of course, that's not the case, but it's definitely like a stereotype that I think that other people who've grown up outside of their culture could maybe relate to that kind of feeling of feeling like you don't quite belong, or feeling like an outsider when the rest of the world assumes that you are something else.
Yeah, I can't imagine how that must have been. We have totally gotten those emails assuming that the majority of our listeners are small, petite, quite frankly, skinny Asian people. And I would not use that descriptor on myself. And I don't know if Nicole would use that on herself. But every time we get one of those emails, it's highly infuriating.
I think that it's actually really part of white supremacy and a microaggression, assuming that all Asian, it's like saying all Asian people are good at math, or whatever stereotype you want to think of. It's also definitely in body type, or, I think that Asian men have to deal with a lot of kind of asexual stereotypes as well. And so that's must be very challenging. So I think that body shape is for sure part of it. And I know that after the murders back in March, there was kind of discussion around Asian fetishization and that kind of thing. And I think some of that does revolve around stereotypes of Asian body types.
True. I did get some DMs after I complained about being screamed at on the street in episode 1 about cultural appropriation and fetishization, being like, oh, well, you're so lucky to get those. Like, no, I don't think anybody is lucky to be screamed at on the street. But turning away from that a little bit, because we could go on probably for hours about it, you also were recently interviewed by NPR's Life Kit, a personal favorite of mine, and you said, I come from the philosophy that your body is your body, and if your clothes don't fit, it's the clothes' problem, it's not your body's problem. And you mentioned that once you started seeing larger bodies wearing me-made clothes, that you found it really empowering for yourself. So can you share a bit more about that?
Absolutely. If you live in a large body, you've often had a frustrating experience buying clothes, not just buying any clothes, but buying clothes that are appropriate for whatever you want to do. So, either from a stylistic manner, like if you're looking for formal clothes, for example, or for the activity that you're doing, like buying ski clothes, for example, is very, very difficult if you have a large body. So, when you shift that around, instead of trying to change your body or believe that there's something wrong with your body if it doesn't fit in the clothes, I think that if you start to think, well, the fact that I can't easily buy a ski jacket in my size is really the problem of the ski jacket manufacturers, because I have money to spend on a ski jacket. I also have money that I would love to spend on really high level technical, like Gore-Tex ski bibs, but I couldn't find, they don't come in my size. So I had to make them, which actually I didn't want to make them, but I had to. And I would like, please take my money, like Gore-Tex ski bib manufacturers. Like, I want to buy these things. Once I started seeing large bodies, fat bodies, just expressing themselves through clothing that they had made themselves on Instagram, like, I just realized that it was, possible for me to just start again, because I went to fashion school a very, very long time ago. And then I worked for a while in costume and wardrobe. And then I sewed for myself for a bit. And then I moved away and didn't actually have access to a sewing machine for quite a number of years. So I didn't sew for myself for like honestly like 15 or 18 years. And I just didn't ever get back into the habit of doing it. And I was like relying on what I could buy ready to wear, but I was never really able to, when I wasn't sewing for myself, I wasn't able to express how I felt and what I wanted to wear through my clothing. I would just kind of buy what fit, what was within my budget, that kind of thing. And so I think, just starting to see people sewing for themselves just kind of gave me that impetus to like start sewing for myself again. And then I had the rather horrible realization that the same challenges that I was having in ready to wear in terms of like finding clothes in the style that I wanted in my size, which was difficult, was actually perpetuated in the pattern industry, certainly in the big four, and definitely in indie patterns as well. And that my options were just as limited, and it was, just as alienating to not be able to find things in my size to sew. And so then, like, I suppose just like my Gore-Tex pants, reluctantly, I started pattern making for myself again. And it was really a question of like, oh, really? Do I have to do this? I'd rather
Yeah.
just buy a pattern and sew it up. Of course, like it's so much easier. I can make patterns, but it would be faster to just buy something that I trusted and just sew it up.
So now you started sewing patterns for yourself, and now you pattern make now as a business part time as half of Mona and Broad. So can you tell us about Mona and Broad and its mission?
Absolutely. So, like I said, I started pattern making for myself because, I couldn't find the styles that I wanted as a pattern. And some of them just like, I couldn't even find them even in sizes that didn't fit me. Like I couldn't even find a sewing pattern at all for what I wanted. So I started doing it for myself. And then sometimes like I would see people online, complaining about fit and that kind of thing for their body. And like I'd made my patterns and I'd made some patterns and I wasn't having those fit problems because I had made them for my body. So I, came to the realization that, perhaps other people might also be interested in sewing these patterns. And I probably had like I had a handful of followers, like basically no one. I was really excited when Jess at Fat Bobbin Girl started following me. I'm like, wow, this like, super famous person is like following me now.
Yeah.
You know how you get that thrill if like someone, a really big account like follows you, you're all like starstruck. So I was like, oh, wow. And so initially I thought, well, it'd be great to like release this just for as a free pattern, just as a service to back to the community, because I get so much from the Instagram sewing community. I'd like to like give back. And initially we released now our glebe pants in 3 sizes. My size was the smallest size. So my size and then 2 sizes larger than that. No instructions, nothing. Just the pattern
Wow.
for free.
Here you go.
Yeah, because I was under the impression that people knew how to sew and that they probably wouldn't need instructions for a simple pair of elastic waisted pants. But I was wrong. I was
I was
really
going
wrong.
to say.
And I mean, part of that is I think that there are a lot of newer sewists in our community in general, but especially fat sewists and plus size sewists. If people haven't had any patterns to sew for themselves ever, then they don't know how to sew clothes. And some people are like, honestly, like expert quilters, expert kids' clothes sewers, and like stuffed toy creators and that kind of thing, but they might have never made a garment for themselves. So we realized pretty soon that we really did need to provide all of those other bells and whistles that companies do when they sell a pattern. And obviously that took a significant amount of time for us to start doing that. And so we started selling our patterns instead. I'm sure there's still some of the original free release pants floating around there somewhere on the internet. But the fact of the matter is we kind of moved into like making it a business and we wanted to see what happened. So it kind of went from there. And that was, I suppose it was like November 2019 that we kind of officially launched as an indie pattern company.
That's not that long ago. I mean, so you all are fairly new to the scene and have definitely made a lasting and important impact in the sewing community. So we're glad that you set out the free pattern and then decided that you wanted to continue to make patterns for the community. So, as a pattern maker, can you walk us through what the typical pattern design process is like, and how does your focus on larger bodies influence your pattern design and creation process?
For sure. So we're just a team of two. So it's me and it's Jess. So Jess at Fat Bobbin Girl, and she lives in New Zealand, and I live in Canada, and we've never met in person.
Oh, wow.
We've never met in person. So we have this entirely Zoom, FaceTime, Instagram relationship. Who knows? Maybe we would like hate each other in real life. I don't think so. But like we have never met. It's going to be really weird when we do, I think. But all of our correspondence, therefore, is through like virtual means. But because we're just two, and so Jess takes care of the kind of customer facing side. So she takes care of all of the like customer service, the website, the blog posts, all of that side. I take care of what I consider like the back end. So making the pattern, grading the pattern, writing the instructions, illustrating the instructions, that kind of thing. And I help out with some customer service in terms of like if people are emailing about the fit and they need advice for that. She can definitely handle a lot of that, but sometimes it's a question that she might just like let me know that I probably need to like wade in and just give an opinion. So given that, we're very, very nimble in how we work. So our process in terms of like selecting a design is really a bit scattered. So we probably have 6 or 7 patterns on the go at any one time in various stages of doneness. So that's like, maybe we decide we want to make a shirt and it's kind of like this. Or it might be we want to make pants that are, like pants with a zip, right? Pants with a fly front or a tapered pant or whatever it is, like the kind of basic concept of it. We'll have that idea. And then the next step is that, I would make a pattern, an initial pattern for that. And then I will send it to Jess and she'll sew it up and see if she likes it. And we'll see how it looks on her body because even though we're a similar like girth, our body shapes are quite different. And so it's a really nice kind of check and balance that it's fitting well on her, it's looking good on her, it's looking good and fitting well on me. And then we feel as though we've got our bases fairly well covered for most people. And then at that point, we kind of make decisions about what we think about things to change, fit things, pattern things, design features, that kind of thing. Sometimes like we might decide to do like a different kind of pocket, that kind of thing. And also at the kind of pattern making stages, a lot of the design elements are decided. So a lot of things, even like the size of the buttons is like literally the first thing that is determined. If I'm doing a shirt pattern, the first thing I have to decide is how big the buttons are going to be. And that is like, I know it seems like really weird. A lot of things kind of hang off that in terms of like how big the button extension is going to be. Like it has to be the right size for the buttons. So at that point, we'll kind of decide, whether we're going to move forward with that. And I might do some revisions. I'll always do revisions. So I'll do some revisions on the pattern and then send it to her again. And then she'll make it up again. I'll make it up again. We're sending terrible like mirror selfies at each other. Sometimes it pauses there and we'll get more excited about something else and that'll like leapfrog over. Sometimes it might be something we haven't even thought of. We'll just be like, hey, this is a need. We need to do it. Let's go. And then we just go full force and just like do something start to finish. And then that other thing's left on the back burner. And we have numerous garments like that at the moment where they're kind of like anywhere between like 60 and 90% done, or the pattern's completely done, but none of the instructions are done, that kind of thing. So once we finalize the pattern in our sample size, which is we use a sizing naming system that is meaningless. So I'm a size F. It's like A to M, size A to M, and I'm an F. So our size A is at about a 41.5-inch hip and a 40-inch bust. And then our typical size range goes to 71.5-inch hip and a 64-inch bust. But if someone doesn't fit into that measurement, if their measurements are larger, then I'll grade it up for them. The next step after we've finished the pattern, like finalize the pattern itself, is that I will grade. Grading is the process of making all of the different sizes. And then I'll start illustrating the step-by-step instructions. I will film, we do sew along videos for all of our patterns that are just freely available on YouTube. Sometimes it's a start to finish, basically sew along with me and I'll tell you what to do next and like demonstrate any techniques, that kind of thing, and like give little hints here and there that you can't ever like express in written pattern instructions. And they're just the kinds of things that when you're experienced at sewing, you learn that you'll just like do this tiny little thing here. I don't know, it's hard to describe, but so I'll film the sew alongs. We'll finalize, then we'll write the instructions. I send them to Jess, and she's an amazing proofreader. So she'll proofread it and correct my writing in terms of like if it's not clear, we'll like rewrite it so it's clearer, that kind of thing. Determine the yardage. And then if it's going to testing, we then send it out to our testers. We pay our testers a stipend, and then sometimes we need to make adjustments to it. Luckily, we never have like disasters where things like won't even like go on to people. It could be a very small change. So it might be like, oh, like I think that pocket looks a bit big on that person on like the smaller sizes maybe, so we'll maybe do another size pocket for the smaller sizes or whatever it is. So we'll make those changes, and then Jess does all of the website stuff, and then it's ready to go. So it is a process. It takes a while, but we are also quite fast. And I think it's honestly just because it's the two of us. And because I do everything myself, I can work at my own pace, squeeze it in whenever. And I also don't have to kind of ask for approval or ask anybody else questions. Like if we were sending it out for grading, for example, then the grader might come back to me and ask me something. And then, there'd be an email exchange back and forth or something like that. Or maybe I'd get the grading back and it would be not what I expected or incorrect. Or if I had a pattern maker working for me and, then I would sew it up and be like, no, this is not what I was thinking at all. That kind of thing. So just because I do everything, like I get to make all those decisions pretty much. And then Jess and I obviously collaborate on like the nitty gritty.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but it really doesn't sound like designing patterns for larger bodies is any different than designing patterns for any body. But I do understand that you developed a nonlinear grading system for Muna and Broad that effectively creates a new block every couple of sizes. And I'm curious for those of us out there who are a little more nerdy on our patterns and the sizing, like what is a nonlinear grading system and what are the benefits of using one as opposed to like a linear one or what we might be used to?
Yeah, I think that I use the term nonlinear grading system just to try and describe what it is I do, which is honestly very atypical. So normally when you grade, you shouldn't grade more than 2 to 3 sizes in either direction from your sample size, or things start getting a little bit skewed. So anybody who's at an extreme end of size range, small or large, has probably discovered that sometimes the proportions of garments get very weird. So on the larger end, sometimes you have huge necklines or hugely long sleeves or very huge armholes, that kind of thing. Or on the other end, if you're at the smallest end of the scale, you might find that you can't get your arm in the sleeve very easily, or the necklines are very tight, or the bust point is like completely not in the right place for you. So those are things that happen where like grading, by changing the size of a garment, the further you go away from that sample size, the more compromises you're making get magnified more and more and more and more. So technically speaking, what should happen is that you have a sample size, you go up and down 3 sizes from that, and then you have another sample size larger, and you would also go down and up from that. And then you might have a third sample size, depending on how big your size range is. So like you shouldn't really do more than like 6 or 7 sizes per block. But when I pattern make and grade, my goal is not to do a sample size and then grade from that. It is to provide the optimal fit for the body that is going in that size. I assume that the body that's going in our smaller size is going to be a different shape from the sample size body. So someone with a 40-inch bust and a 41-inch hip, I don't really consider to be a plus size type body. It's very likely they wouldn't identify as plus sized, very unlikely they would identify as fat, because their body is closer to, like, it is basically a straight size body, and so it more closely resembles, that kind of dress form, that ideal that we might have in our mind of just like a very averaged out body. And so that person doesn't need as much room for like a full tummy. So when I grade, I like those things get lessened, I suppose, as I'm grading to there. And then as I'm getting bigger, I would assume that as someone's body grows larger, it doesn't just grow larger in every dimension. We gain soft tissue on different parts of our body at different rates, and making patterns is about making generalizations about bodies. And that's why most of us do have to do small adjustments. However, I don't think it's reasonable to do an adjustment to a pattern that every single person of that size would have to do. Like, if you have a 60-inch hip, you're probably going to have a full belly. Like, I would put money on it. Unless you're like 7 feet tall, if you are basically the size of most humans, then you would probably need a full belly. Like, you'll have a large belly in the front. And so then I believe that those things should be built into the pattern for you. I don't think it's reasonable for every single 60-inch hip person to have to do like a full tummy adjustment, full belly adjustment on their pants. So then as I'm going, I'm making those adjustments and I'm building those things in. And then even after I've done like my grade, I actually go into every single size and I tweak it and optimize it, often by eye, actually, to make sure that the armholes are an appropriate shape to fit around the bust or around the arm, just to like check everything and make sure everything is going to have the best possible fit. So we're not just relying on like a grading algorithm just to like average it out in either direction. Every size almost has its own block, and it's a very non-industry thing to do.
But I think the proof is in the sales and the following and the people who have kind of realized that that is what they want out of the patterns that they're buying, right? So they're voting with their dollars. And from what I've seen, most people making your patterns then don't have to do all of those adjustments because you've already thought of what does this body actually
That's
look
my
like.
biggest hope, and it makes me very very happy when I see people get a great fit on something and they say they didn't make any adjustments, or the adjustment they've made is what I consider very minor, like a length adjustment. Shorten or lengthen like a leg or an arm or that kind of thing. I consider those very minor adjustments, or even a rise adjustment doesn't have to be that major. A lot of rise is about personal preference, so it's not necessarily about fit. So anyway, that's my hope, is that it does fit each person as well as it can.
Well, and I love how you've filled this need in the community. And it goes back to what you said on the Life Kit interview. Like, it's not larger bodies, fat bodies aren't the problem. It's the access to ready to wear clothing that will allow them to express themselves. So you and Jess have created this method by which people in the Fat Sewist community are able to skip needing to do all this extra work and have the clothes that they want, for their bodies. Because like you said, the bodies aren't the problem, the clothes are. So you give them this way to create that cuts out the extra need when other companies aren't providing for this segment of the community that, as any other body types, deserve to enjoy sewing for themselves. So I really love what Mona and Broad has become to everyone. I'm just blown away by how much new. I suppose the pandemic has kind of gotten like you say 2019 and it feels like a lifetime ago. I'm like, oh, so like that's less than 2 years ago then,
Yeah.
right? Mona and Broad is less than 2 years
We're
old.
about 18 months old. I mean, our real mission, I suppose, I mean, we haven't actually done like mission and vision and that kind of thing, but when people say that pattern making for large bodies is hard, or if, I think what we do is we see and respect people who have large bodies just as much as we respect people who live in smaller bodies. So, it's really disappointing to see patterns or people sewing clothes that don't fit their body well because they're not given the same amount of care and attention as a smaller size range. And so I think the fact that we
Mhm.
put that care and that attention, I suppose, like a non-judgmental lens, we're not saying your body actually should be like this. It shouldn't be the way it is. We're saying this is your body for your size is absolutely the way it should be. And we will try our best to build patterns that will fit your body as it is today. that's, I think that's really important to us. And I'd like to think that's what our community sees as well, and that they feel seen and they feel heard. And when they sew our clothes, they kind of can feel, I guess, like they can feel the love that's put into it. They can feel the time and the
Yeah.
respect for their bodies that we have put into our patterns. So that's really our biggest hope.
I think it's reflected in the enthusiasm for Mona and Broad that you are delivering on that for the sewing community. So, uh, in terms of the broader, independent pattern designing community, what, if any, changes have you seen in the online sewing community in terms of size inclusivity? Before or even after even Mona and Broad started.
So I've not been on Instagram for that long. So I think I joined Instagram in like May of 2019. And it was during a Me Made May, but I didn't know that didn't happen all the time. So I
Yeah,
happened to
a thing. Yeah.
come onto Instagram when people were just like posting, like every day they were posting their clothes. And so it was actually a really great and inspiring time to join. It one of the many size inclusivity discussions had occurred, the previous February, when I was not aware of it. Um, and that one was by no means the first time. This is a recurring topic, and it's really disappointing to me that we're still having this conversation, and that people who don't fit into the current ranges of patterns, that it's kind of this recurring topic that people are asking for clothing in their size. Now, I think there's some different ways to look at it. And, there are some different viewpoints. And, there's quite a large contingent of people who are honestly, I think, sick and tired of it. And they're people who have been in the community speaking up and asking for much longer than me. Um, so, I would definitely refer people to at the Rotund, who has been in our community for a very long time as an activist, at Rare Device, Shannon, who also runs So Queer. Um, Whitney Gets Stressed as well. So there's like been a lot of people, and I can provide you some more links if you want for the show notes, because those are just off the top of my head. There's like plenty of people who are activists in size inclusivity. I think that we have seen some changes in just in the time that I've been on Instagram. And I think those changes come in two flavors. And I think you identified them really well in the cultural appropriation episode, is that some companies do their change, whatever it is, if it's to stop culturally appropriating or if it's to improve their size range, whatever it is, they do it in a way that that you're being respected, and that they're not doing it because they're scared or because they don't want to annoy people. They're doing it because they have realized it's the right thing, it's overdue, and they're like rectifying their former actions. And, like you said, you see this in how they handle announcement posts, how they publicize it, what kind of models they choose for their patterns moving forward in a larger range. What kind of what makes their sharing on their social media in terms of community makes. Are they only sharing small bodies, or are they sharing large bodies as well? Or are they even highlighting large bodies? So, and then on the other hand, you know, there are other companies that really appear to be dragged into it kicking and screaming, and that does not feel good. So, it's really unfortunate when when that happens, and I think that a lot of people feel that, you know what? If you're not going to do a larger size range, fine. Just say that you're not, and we'll stop that conversation and we'll move on with our lives. But so yeah, it's really tricky. I think that people are tired, and just as with cultural appropriation, it took a lot of tries. Like Emi Ito has been talking about cultural appropriation for years and years and years, and it wasn't until this year that it was kind of acted upon in a more widespread way. So I think that it's kind of the same with size inclusivity. I think, though, that fat phobia is more widely acceptable. It's a more widely acceptable form of discrimination than racism is. So I think that we're really, one of the issues is that we're fighting against really strongly rooted societal fat phobia in terms of getting true size inclusivity in both sewing patterns, but also in ready-to-wear clothing as well, of all styles.
I think that's true. And I think what you point out is that now the community is smart enough to recognize when we're being paid lip service by a company and when they actually truly do want to be inclusive, and see that not only as a smart business decision, but the right business decision to be a truly inclusive company built for everybody, literally. And it feels like that is smaller progress than should have been made given the number of times this has come up. But hopefully, maybe this time is different and we are actually going to see people start posting min-max measurements and using hashtags like so limited sizing so that others are more aware even of this. And it's almost like also with cultural appropriation, like you said, like there are still people using the old hashtags and old names for patterns when companies have very publicly come out and said, stop using that name, we don't want you to use that name, which has been both discouraging and disheartening, but also it helps you see like who truly cares and who doesn't really give a shit. So I would love to wrap this up by asking you if there's anything you want listeners to take away from this episode and actually start doing, either in the sewing community or in their own sewing
So what
practices.
I'd love to see is for our straight-sized allies to become activists. So not just to mark the maximum measurement on their post, which is extremely helpful, don't get me wrong, it's great, but to actually just not post those garments or not sew those garments. Because every time you post that garment, it's disappointing for someone who can't fit into it. So, I'll be scrolling along and like people are really good. Like people are so creative. I love being inspired by their makes. So I'll see a new pattern that I haven't seen before and I'll be like, wow, that's a great pattern. What I'll do is I'll click on the hashtag or click on the like pattern designer, go to their bio, click on the link, hope that it works. It'll take me to their like site. Then I'll try and find that pattern in their listing. I'll go in, I'll look for the size chart. Sometimes the size chart isn't in the pattern listing. Sometimes it's another link. I'll click on that. Then I'll look it up, find the one in imperial or in metric or whatever I use, and then discover that I'm, 10 or 15 inches too large for their larger size. And that is really disappointing. But my disappointment is not alleviated by seeing the maximum size in their post. It's just made it more convenient for me to be disappointed in the sizing on a pattern. And so I would love to see more activism. And I don't think that means emailing pattern designers to request larger sizes, though that is like a really great thing. And if you feel moved to do that, fantastic. But actually, what makes a difference is just not supporting patterns that aren't inclusive. Just as people now are not supporting culturally appropriative pattern companies and making those decisions, it would be great to see some more ally activism in terms of size inclusivity as well. I would love for people even just to challenge themselves for a week or a month or something to only sew or only wear things that are size inclusive, just so they know what it feels like for large-bodied sewists to have to find patterns. Because I think that if you have no trouble fitting into most size charts, even though you might recognize that it's a challenge and that it's hard, I don't think that people really understand the full experience of how it is when you literally don't have options or very few options for your size body.
Truth. I was looking at a pattern this morning. I was like, that's a really cute pattern. And maybe I'll buy it because I can find there's a discount from an event. And then I was like, the size chart. I've already called them out on another garment. Like I don't think they should get my money for another pattern that other people can't have. Is that going to make it more time consuming and hard for me to buy a shirt with a placket pattern sometime? Yeah, probably, but that can't be nearly as hard as not having any options, right? And I think that's the minimum that we can all do when we're looking at patterns and kind of on this
For
constant
sure.
cycle of buying.
Well, Leela, thank you for joining us today. Where can
Thanks so
listeners
much for
find
having
you?
me. My personal account on Instagram is at Leila Sews. So Leila underscore Sews, Sews. And then Muna and Broad can be found on Instagram at MUNA and Broad, BROAD. And our website is also munaandbroad.com.
Thanks, Leila, for taking the time to chat with us. We had such a great conversation and went on a couple meaningful tangents about advocacy and allyship, which we haven't included here, and we would love to share those nuggets with you later.
One thing we touched upon with Leela was the idea that Asians are expected to look a certain way. And within Asia and among the Asian diaspora, we have beauty ideals of fair skin. All over India, Southeast Asia, and East Asia, skin whitening products are popular and used regularly. Yes, this is colorism. So for women, also big eyes and double lids, and more recently, the selfie doll look of very pale skin, big eyes with double eyelids, a tiny nose, rosebud lips, all on a small face with a subtly pointed chin.
And a small body.
Yes, and small bodies. And most ready to wear clothing available in Asia is small. We looked at the most popular high street shops such as Uniqlo, Giordano, Pen Shop, and Yes Style. They have, for example, around 31 to 32 waist as the maximum for women. I'm laughing because that is laughable and insane, though men's upper limits are a little bit more varied. Fat shaming is prevalent, and we can point to a couple pop culture examples, such as the Hong Kong movie Love on a Diet and the South Korean movie 200 Pounds Beauty. And I just have to say, I am a 200-pound beauty, and that title is both hysterical and infuriating.
Listeners, if you aren't familiar with either of these movies, basically they insinuate that if you're a fat woman, all you have to do to get a man is to lose a massive amount of weight and then he will throw himself at you. And it is just so messed up. Add in some colorism, plastic surgery, and you have a movie. And all of this is to say, within many Asian cultures and among the Asian diaspora, there is tremendous pressure to conform to quite narrow definitions of beauty. So, for example, my aunts related to me and not, the auntie type, will ask me about what I'm eating, or if I'm running because I'm prepping for a race, or more about my exercise routine, which just frankly is none of their business. And it's extremely frustrating and annoying to deal with and terrible, quite frankly. And from both non Asians and Asians, there is this assumption that we are all small, however incorrect that is.
Yes, there is this perception that all Asians are petite. And like Ada said, Asian people have that assumption too. Some do. And this is so problematic because we're such a broad range of people. You can't just lump us together as one great big other, one great petite other. And we've actually gotten multiple emails and DMs from individuals and pattern companies under this assumption. So there's that. And of course, it is untrue. We've seen studies that look at more than just BMI, and Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean adults all have vastly varying body types and sizes, and to just cite, one example. We'd also venture to say that these stereotypes have more to do with Asian fetishization, that people may just want to see Asian women and men like a certain way. Now, personally, I have fit outside this stereotype my entire life. It's annoying and also painful to look back on how I used to see my body when I was younger, and all, because of all this, the stereotype that I'm supposed to be petite, quote unquote. Now, not only did I always, not feel like I belonged, because of Western, just never mind Asian standards, like Western standards of beauty. I also used to see myself as this like defective Asian person because I didn't fit into the stereotype. And unfortunately, family or, family or people close to us that aren't blood related, but you call family anyway, would reinforce the stereotype by commenting on my body frequently. And it still happens, both in a negative way. So, but also in a positive way, like, oh, you look good. Did you lose weight? Like this is all negative because commenting on, people's bodies is not anyone's business. And it's also older and younger family members, like nosy and cruel aunties, but then also younger cousins who would like make fun of each other. They never make fun of me because I think that they were intimidated or scared of me because I was the older cousin. But they would make fun of other people for being fat. So this stereotype gets ingrained in our heads at such a young age, and it's awful, but I hope it's changing. So when these messages came through with the disguised or sometimes not disguised assumption that Asian women in particular are petite, I was livid.
Yeah, admittedly, I haven't always fit outside of this stereotype, but as I got older, I literally grew out of it. I put on muscle really easily and I find it extremely hard to lose it. And so I have a quote unquote more athletic build, which, didn't go over well when I was in ballet as a teenager. Teenagers are cruel, but like, think judgy, pretty privileged teens in ballet, they're like super cruel. And when you think of ballerinas, you also think of a stereotype: stick thin and small enough to carry on one hand, not muscular and able to jump 4 or 5 feet in the air. And so that was really tough, coupled with the stereotypes around Asian women. And I stopped ballet just before I went back to Taiwan in high school. And I think at that point, when I was shopping for clothing there, in night markets and in stores, I was a large or on the higher end of their sizes or one size. And I was smaller than I am now. And in Asia, it is difficult to be large and find clothes that fit you. The size ranges at the bigger clothing stores are pretty narrow, and night markets and cheap clothing stores often offer just one size. It is more cost effective to produce one size, and this isn't just an Asia specific practice, but as you can probably guess, one size does not fit all. It usually only fits or looks good on a very, very narrow band of the population.
Yeah, and if you don't fit in it, you don't really fit in, do you?
Nope. But getting back to the sewing world, the debate over size inclusivity seems to kind of kick off every now and then. And in 2019, Betsy, the pattern maker and designer behind SBCC Patterns, put out a blog post entitled RTW Ready to Wear Explained: Why Size Inclusivity is Not Always Practiced, which made the rounds, saying that it was very expensive and not profitable to expand size ranges, as indie pattern designers and a few others agreed. And this kicked off just a garbage fire of rage online, with people responding that, well, it was worth the investment and that their words were hurtful and dismissive. And we know that many people start sewing their own clothes precisely because they feel dismissed by the ready to wear industry. And now, when things like that come up, they're being sidelined again by some in the sewing world. And I think this issue seems to come up again and again because enough change hasn't really materialized, right? Like, we even found a blog post from the Idle Fancy blog way back in 2013 imploring indie pattern designers to consider plus size sewists. It's like clockwork. Like, every few months, this call will reappear on the internet and we will all be angry about it again.
We are starting to see incremental change regarding size inclusivity among pattern makers. We're seeing more indie pattern designers start to expand their size range. Some to look at include Friday Pattern Company. Some patterns go up to 7X. Helen's Closet up to size 30 to 32 US. By Hand London up to a 60 3/4 inch waist. And today, Stitch Witch Patterns announced that they will now go up to a size 34, which is a 58 bust, 51 waist, and 60 hip. So you'll find more details about these changes in the show notes.
And of course, there are designers like Cashmerette, Ellie, and Mac, which makes patterns, many of which that go up to 7XL. Style So Me, which goes up to a 45-inch waist and 55-inch hip for a shirt dress, for example. And J. Reed Desiree, her two patterns go up to a size 28. The blazer goes up to a 55 and a quarter bust and a 51-inch waist. Her dress goes up to a 52-inch waist and a 62-inch hip, along with Munna and Broad, like we talked to Leela about. And these companies have all from the start been really inclusive and have recognized that the demand for designs for large bodies is out there. And we're going to link them in the show notes as well.
Unfortunately, other pattern designers have been slow to jump on board. Tilly and the Buttons is an example that frequently comes up in the size inclusivity discussion. Their patterns are known for being beginner friendly, but many sewists point out that their sizing chart wasn't large enough to include them, so they get pointed to Tilly and the Buttons as beginners, so they want to get into sewing, to sew for their bodies, only to be disappointed that the patterns wouldn't fit them. It looks like after a few years of requests, they finally started to update some of their designs as of April 2021, albeit only a 61-inch hip, which other designers have designed for years.
And the big four are very slowly coming around too, with some designs going up to a 56-inch hip, which you could say really isn't enough. And in fact, they have taken steps to further ostracize the fat sewing community recently. The podcast Punk Frockers recently had a couple of episodes discussing size inclusivity, which we will also link in the show notes. Co-host Jenny at Joe Hassler, herself a fat sewist, talks about how the Big Four used to have a section in their pattern books that was specifically for plus size sewists, or their version of plus size, and now they've gotten rid of it, making it even more difficult for consumers to determine like which patterns actually come in their range or their size. And we really enjoyed listening to these episodes of Punk Frockers, and we encourage you to listen to them as well for more perspectives on the size inclusivity discussion.
Absolutely. I love those episodes and a lot of their episodes at Punk Frockers. Now, if you're looking at a pattern, we encourage you to take a look at its size range, especially if you're a straight size maker. Consider whether they deserve your custom and promotion if they aren't making an effort to be inclusive. Write the pattern maker an email, tag them on Instagram, use the tags to push them to expand their sizing. Make your opinion known. Ada does have an email template for people to use, and it's on her blog, which we will link in the show notes.
Yes, and we've said it before, I'm going to say it again, representation matters. We can't understate the impact for all of us of larger bodies being seen and seen wearing beautiful clothes, and there are so many knowledgeable and creative fat sewists who can help populate and diversify your feed out there, such as at Joe Hassler, so Jenny from Punk Frockers, who we just mentioned, at A Different Stitch, at Val_Leclerc, at Fat Bobbin Girl, Jess, the other half of Munna and Broad. So if you don't follow these sewists and so many more, you should definitely follow them and diversify your feed.
Diversifying your feed is always a good idea. Now, for the pattern designers listening, Cashmerette has a comprehensive ebook that takes you through the business aspects, such as the plus-size sewing market, what plus-size sewists actually want from sewing patterns, as well as tips for drafting and grading. It's a great resource if you want to make your size expansion financially viable.
And we've done a bit of research on the financial investment to expand sizes, and honestly, there wasn't a lot that we could find that was publicly available.
We know that Delphine of Just Patterns shares financial progress reports every year on her blog, every year. And she started extending her sizes in 2019, starting with 2 patterns, and she managed to turn a profit that year still. We didn't see any extra expenditures for the size expansion work that were explicitly called out. Now, in 2020, she started upgrading 2 more patterns, and again, we didn't find any major expenditures to do so. Now, some costs we found that might have been applicable to size expansions were $442 on learning, $156 for an additional dress form, and $813 to pay testers. And that just covers the fabric and printing the pattern. There's a lot of other expenditures that she had, but none of them stand out as strictly related to expanding a size range. We will link to her blog in the show notes for you to take a look. So one thing for designers to consider is making sure that at the outset, their patterns account for grading costs. It's the first thing that you can do to ensure that your pattern is inclusive of fat bodies right at the outset.
Right. And I was chatting about this with Gabby Brown at Lady Grift on Instagram, a fellow Denver-based sewist who is also a technical fashion designer and fit specialist. Gabby is the person you may know as Dear Gabby over on the Socialists, RIP. She had a regular column there answering sewists' fit questions, and she has fashion industry experience. She explained to me, and I asked her for permission to reshare this with you all. When she develops a block, she does all of the sizes at the same time. So plus, straight, and petite to make sure they all have the same design aesthetic. Then for each block, the base size pattern has to be approved, and in the corporate world, she said it sometimes takes 4 to 6 samples of each base size, so multiply times 3 blocks, so 12 to 18 total, to approve something that works. Admittedly, if an indie pattern designer is or has a skilled pattern maker working with them, this might take fewer times or less tries to get right. If their pattern maker charges on an hourly basis, yes, this can get expensive. So the logical conclusion that Gabby and I reached was that the cost-effective thing to do here is to make a new third block and then start to work it into new patterns moving forwards. But of course, this is at odds with most pattern designers' sales interests, which is to generate sales to pay the bills and make a profit. So at the same time, I think there are a ton of patterns out there that we can all name that have been popular for years, and there isn't as high of a trend turnover in the indie sewing pattern world as there is in, let's say, like fast fashion. Although there are some pattern companies that just churn out new patterns. So it does feel like for most designers, if they made a pretty good pattern in a size inclusive range, they could ride that pattern for years and hopefully recoup their upfront costs over time. And I know that brings up cash flow issues. I also have a business. I get it. And that brings up the question of, is a designer doing this full time, or is it a secondary source of income for them, and how are they funding this business? And just from my observations, I personally think we're at an inflection point with the indie sewing pattern design market where there are still new companies coming up and starting out, which is fantastic. But there are also some that have been around for a while and grown large enough to hire a team or partner with the big four. And when you are large enough to do that, just like any other business, you have to decide if you're going to keep investing in the business yourself or bring on outside investors, or if you're going to go get a small business loan or line of credit to invest in your business. And maybe some designers are doing this and not talking about it, but maybe some designers just don't know that this is an option to fund a size expansion, or even other ideas like crowdfunding, a Patreon-esque subscription like Mona and Broad do, or so many other options out there to bring in more revenue to pay for that, research and development cost up front. And I think what frustrates me most is that this is such a creative community of people, and clearly we make fantastic things, but I'm just not seeing that creative thinking being applied to actually figuring out how to solve this problem. And when Gabby and I were chatting, she also pointed out that there's not a lot of plus size drafting out there, or information about drafting out there. It's just not taught in design schools at all. She gained her experience from actually working at companies that carry those size ranges, but if she hadn't been exposed that way, then she wouldn't have picked up those skills.
One thing we'd like to ask pattern makers to consider is, why are you in the business of designing patterns for people, and who are you designing those patterns for? And yes, it might require a large investment to offer a wider range of sizes. And yes, it is tough to run a small business, especially if you don't come from a place of privilege. Now, we urge you to factor in the budget and the time for inclusive sizing as a necessary expense from the very start. It is so worth it.
Lastly, we know that talking about the size of our bodies can be such an emotionally fraught, tough subject for a lot of us. And we know that looking into the mirror and seeing skinny or fat just carries so many complexities. And it's been something I've struggled with, and something I know my mom has struggled with too. Her hip measurement is in the high 40s, and she's struggled with her weight for my entire life. I can't remember a time in my life when it wasn't, an issue. And she's going through some medical stuff right now. And when we were at the doctor's office, she made a comment that I wanted to share. And she said, most people with this condition lose weight. Why didn't I lose weight? Which just made me so sad, kind of reflecting on it and being there with her. Like, she just was told that she has a major medical issue to go take care of. And she was less concerned about her treatment and more concerned about losing weight. And so, if you wonder where we get our body image issues from, it's who is around us and what they're exposed to and what they're thinking and how they're feeling. And so we'd like to offer the reminder that we are all sewists who are making clothes that fit our bodies and the shapes that they are, and we all deserve patterns that fit us. And all of our bodies deserve to be clothed with care and love and fun and delight.
And on that note, our episode, our entire podcast, is meant to uplift marginalized voices and give you our perspectives. We love that some of you are listening from another perspective, the perspective of privilege. If you would like to be an ally, please do the work. So in the context of size inclusivity, straight-sized folks should take on the responsibility for reviewing what's already out there, including listening to this podcast. And since you've listening to my voice right now, you've made it to the end, so yay. Listen to the Punk Frockers episodes and read what fat sewists have already said. Use these resources to formulate your plan for being an ally. Just to recontextualize it, because we spent a couple of episodes on this, cultural appropriation. For cultural appropriation, it's especially incumbent upon white folks to review what's already out there, listen to the podcast, read a plethora of material that's already out there, and use those resources to formulate your plan as an ally. If you're looking for what not to do, it's ask advice of people who are negatively affected by the issue you are seeking to better understand, like size inclusivity or cultural appropriation. So, straight-sized people, don't DM Leela asking her to help you figure out how to be a better ally. That's asking her to do more free labor when there are many opportunities for you to read and hear her thoughts. There's also Google. Just do the work. I do want to add that we here at the podcast have gotten a lot of messages from folks who want to engage in further discussion. However, they are often geared toward asking us how they can better understand things, seeking validation for their past or current actions, or to alleviate guilt that they've had over past actions. We can't help you figure out what you should or should not do with regard to any of the difficult subjects that we cover, like size inclusivity or cultural appropriation. We can't help you navigate your identity as a person of privilege. We can't help you interpret your actions as offensive or inoffensive. We have already done the labor of presenting our point of view to try to provide further things for you to consider as you navigate your own journeys. Circling back again to the entire purpose of this podcast, it is to uplift voices of marginalized people. To that end, we ask that you please think twice before asking us questions seeking direction and validation for actions that you may have taken in the past or are currently taking. Ooh, okay. That being said, we did want to thank you for listening and joining us for Season 1. This is the last episode of the season, and we wanted to shout out to everyone at the Asian Sewist Collective who participated this season, in no particular order. So shout out to Mariko, Eileen, Arthi, Shailin, Leslie, Cindy, Esther, Constance, Ellen, Henry, Erica, and Jaina. Congratulations. Yay, we did it. 4 months ago, none of us were podcasters, and look at us now. So big thank you to my co-host, Ada Chen, for conceiving of this podcast, bringing us all together, and keeping this ship afloat. None of this would be possible without you. We are going to take at least a few weeks off before we begin planning for Season 2. During the off-season, we will be continuing to post on our Instagram, featuring makes from our collective and other Asian sewists, clips from the pod, some that have never been before listened to, maybe they didn't make it to the pod, you'll have to listen to find out, and resources that center around the Asian community that we think our listeners will appreciate.
And with that, thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Asian Sewist Collective podcast. This is the end of Season 1, so we will be taking a little break over the summer. Woohoo! Woo! But we do have some fun and thought-provoking episodes in the works for next season already, so please make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss us when we're back for Season 2. If you like our show, you can support us by following us on Instagram at Asian Sewist Collective. That's one word, Asian Sewist Collective. You can also spread the word and tell your friends. We would love it if you could rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. All of the links and resources we mentioned in today's episode will be in the show notes on our website. That's asiansewistcollective.com. And we'd love to hear from you. Email us with your questions, comments, or even ideas and thoughts for season 2, or voice messages if you'd like to be featured on a future episode at asiansewistcollective@gmail.com.
This episode was brought to you by your co-hosts Ada Chen and Nicole Angeline. This episode was researched by Mariko Abe and Arthi Rovi, produced by Eileen Lung, and edited by Shailen Joy and Leslie Ream Hunt. Thank you so much to the other members of our collective who made this week's episode a reality. This is the Asian Sewist Collective podcast, and we'll see you next season.